Welcome, everybody, to this week's edition of the Fifth Round Podcast. We're here with your host, Ian Ford, Brian France. I am the closer, Brian Mariano. Now, guys, I was sitting in this exact studio over the weekend watching Fox's coverage of UFC Fight Night from Sacramento, California, and there's many storylines we can take out of this weekend. Urijah Faber's last fight, the Paige Van Zandt fight. Now, I was interested because not only, as we talked last week, we had a lot of feedback on Facebook, which was great. Keep hitting us up on Facebook at the Fifth Round Podcast. And not only for Urijah Faber's last fight, but this main card and this fight between Paige Van Zandt and Michelle Waterson. Now, this was insanely good, I thought, for most of the fight. What were your guys' thought about that fight?
It was definitely a great card. It wasn't the result the UFC necessarily wanted, but it's a different look than they've put on Fox before. And overall, I thought it was extremely interesting. Brian, what were your takeaways from that?
Michelle Waterson looked absolutely amazing. I mean, that ground game, when Paige Van Zandt was about to get a reversal on her and get out of being on the ground, being from underneath her, Michelle spun over, was still on her back, and then finished it.
Yeah, I mean, from watching it and takeaways from it, Van Zandt has got all the athleticism in the world and still could be great, but the hype has not lived up to the product so far. And unfortunately, if you break that down, Van Zandt still using the same basic grappling escapes that she's used from the very beginning. Waterson's a veteran. She's been a champion in a different promotion in Invicta. She knows what to expect. And when Van Zandt just uses the exact same game plan and the exact same techniques that she's been using forever, Waterson knew what to expect. And as soon as the movements came, she just countered perfectly, set herself in a perfect position, and ended the fight. Unfortunately for Van Zandt, the growth hasn't been there. There's a lot of reasons that could be. It could have been because she spent too much time dancing with the stars on ABC. It could be that the coaching's just not there because she's a team alpha male. It could be a lot of different things. Things need to change. But overall, the card was a really interesting look. It's different than what the UFC's done on Fox cards before, like we were talking about the other day. It's not a title fight. It's not your top-ranked fighters. It's your young, up-and-coming stars. They're putting them on Fox, and from projections, they did better than they've done on Fox in quite a long time with 3.5 million views.
Now, I question that. Was it just because of this fight, or do you think the overall card itself drew people to want to watch it on Fox?
I think the overall card itself, the four main card fights, you had the retirement fight for Urijah Faber, and then you had 3 fights featuring young, up-and-coming talent. 2 of them with the Paige Van Zandt Waterson fight, people know Paige and are excited. She's making a lateral move from one network television station to another. She's going to carry fans over.
Yeah, I think that was really smart by them, knowing
Absolutely.
that if you were any person that watched Dancing with the Stars and then you saw this promo running over, Fox's football coverage for the last couple of weeks, and you saw this, you're like, oh, I remember her. She was on Dancing with the Stars. And if you had nothing else to watch, which, let's be honest, there really wasn't a lot to watch Saturday.
No.
So why not? And
Absolutely.
they probably drew a much bigger number than what they thought because of that.
Absolutely. And underneath that, they had the Mickey Gall's Sage Northcutt fight. Sage Northcutt has been a young guy they're trying to push, whether he's on Instagram breaking apples with one hand or
his signature flipping the cage.
Absolutely. And then Mickey Gall, he of the CM Punk fight. So that's 2 young and up-and-coming guys with a lot of exposure. You put them together. And then even the opener for the card, you've got a guy who models for Abercrombie & Fitch in Alan Jubin.
And Versace.
Versus Mike Perry, who has gotten a lot of attention in the media, not for good reasons, but a lot of attention, and is a young, talented guy that had knocked out 2 guys in a row in the first round, and they were excited for it. So they put all those young guys on one card, and it really did well. No title fight, no contenders fight. Nobody coming off of pay-per-view right back onto the card, and it still worked. No, it's a whole new plan.
It was definitely a very well planned out card, especially with having those young guys. I mean, you had the top 2 fights being somewhat getting well known with Paige Van Zandt, and then Sage Northcutt coming off of looking for a fight, the first golden boy for Dana White coming off that show, and then you had the CM Punk Slayer and Mickey Gall, who's been talking so much crap since he started getting into the UFC, and is going to keep talking crap until he gets to the top.
Absolutely.
If he gets to the top.
The only downside to this is that if you're just the average fan, you're not thinking much of it. But for me, I watched it and went, wow, this is not the quality I'm used to seeing. Paige VanZant is not as skilled as the UFC or a fan would like to watch. She's just not. There's a lot of holes in that game. She's really raw. She doesn't excel in any one area. And Michelle Waterson, who hadn't fought in a year and a half and is honestly a 105-pound fighter. She was the Invicta champ at 105. That weight class doesn't exist in the UFC, so she's fighting up. She's tiny, and she just schooled Paige. And then Sage Northcutt. God, does he look bad on the ground. He's getting better. He looks far better than he did in his last fight against Barberina, but it doesn't look great. He really doesn't. There's holes there big time on the ground, and Mickey Gall exposed them. At the same time, Mickey Gall didn't look outstanding on his feet either. So it's not the top-shelf stuff we're used to seeing, but that's young talent coming up, raw, and improving.
Well, that's the one thing I wanted to hit with you, Ian, especially because you've been on this podcast many a time saying that you're not a big fan of Mickey Gall himself anyway. And, of course, a lot of people will know him like I do for the CM Punk Slayer, as we call him. And that was really his coming out party, per se. But can't you be a little more, after watching him fight this weekend, can you see him really making a run now at maybe getting a title shot in the next year or so?
No.
He's got a long way to go.
Number one, you call out Dan Hardy, who was a 175 or 170 pounder, fought GSP, was knocking out all the guys at 170 pounds. You want to move down to 155, face him on his coming back fight. He's gonna knock you out. There's no doubt. Mickey Gall's striking game is nowhere near the upper class of Dan Hardy, and he's been out forever.
Well, that's true, but to be honest, I think Mickey Gall, if I'll say one thing about him, has been intelligent with his decisions. He knows Dana White's going to be in the crowd watching somebody else on an episode of looking for a fight, and he calls out CM Punk because he knows that's a fight that he can get and make a name. Now he gets that fight. He comes off that and he goes, who can I beat that's got a big name? Sage Northcutt. He's not calling out contenders. He's calling out guys with name value that will propel him to stardom, that he knows he has their number. Dan Hardy, say one thing about Dan Hardy, his ground game never got anywhere. Never. It's really bad. And he's been off for 3 years with a heart condition. If Mickey Gall puts him on the mat, that's over in the first round, real quick.
But he can also get knocked out in the first round.
Sure, but can you pick yourself an easier fight with a better name? I don't think so. I think that's about as easy as you get.
155 pounds.
I think it's about as easy as you get. So Mickey Gall's just being a genius, turning around and going, Dan Hardy, I can beat that guy, and I can beat that guy easy. Give me that fight.
So if you guys are listening here in the Fifth Round Podcast, hit us up on Facebook, comment on this. Do you really think that Mickey Gall can go and call out? And is he being as smart as Ian's saying he is? Because it seems to be that way. He's calling out people that have some sort of star power to him and can say, listen, I can sell fights for you. I can be the guy that can go out, call somebody, sell a fight, and then perform in the octagon. So if you guys agree with that, hit us up on Facebook. Let us know. If not, do like you did last week. Tell Ian he's an idiot, and then we'll get into that as we move on later in the podcast. But, guys, this was an interesting card because not only, like Ian, you've been saying that the quality really wasn't there, but was it really what they were looking for to have any sort of value there? Did they just want value to say, I want to bring in people from the outside world, almost like they did in Albany, to where the fighting might not be up to par like you see in a 205 or something like that, but just I want to bring in the normal fan. And I think they did that with this fight.
Yeah, that's what they're looking for. They're looking to get eyes on fighters that they can, fighters that are attractive to the fan, like Sage Northcutt and Paige VanZant, that will pull people to watch and to make them into something big. Because what we've seen over the last couple of years is that it used to be the UFC put a show out and you watched it because it said UFC on it and it was great. Now the shows that are drawing are names. Ronda Rousey and Conor McGregor, cards they're on, are 61% of the UFC's pay-per-view shares this last year. That's massive. So they want to build new stars. What better way than to put them on free fights, young and up-and-coming guys with some name value, and see if you can't make them a star. Now, Mickey Gall, to answer your question, he will not see a title anytime soon. But that's not to say that Mickey Gall can't get there in time. Does he need 6-7 fights? Absolutely. It'll be 2 years. But that guy has the potential to be a star if he continues to grow like he's growing. It's just he's so raw. He's had 3 professional fights.
Mm-hmm.
That's it.
And he's also only 22. I mean, he's got a long ways to grow and perfect his craft.
The 3 of us are graduating from high school. That kid's not even in high school yet. That makes me feel old.
Think about it that way. We'll go from someone who doesn't have a lot of experience yet to someone who's had a ton of experience and was really the draw of this UFC fight night, and that was Urijah Faber, because not only was he drawing everyone from California, but now when he says it's his last fight, he's drawing all the UFC fans in because they want to see this. And guys, this wasn't even close. This fight was all Urijah Faber the entire night. What was your thoughts?
They were really nice to Urijah Faber with this matchup. Brad Pickett has won 1 of his last 6 now, 2 of his last 8. It's about time that he follows Urijah Faber out the door and calls it a career, because it's just not the same guy we used to see. Mm-hmm. But Urijah looked all right. I don't know if it's just me, but he looked faster than he's looked in a long time for half a minute, and then glacially slow for half a minute. And then he looked really quick again. And it's just bursts of speed as opposed to what we used to see. But it was nice to see him come out and looking really crisp again.
Yeah, he definitely looked like he fell off the map the last few fights, but this fight he looked better than he has in a little while. I mean, it could be because it was against Brad Pickett, which in his own right is a veteran and has been around just as long as Faber has, but never was able to get that big name like Faber because he never got close to where Faber was. So, but I was really hoping I'd be able to see a finish or the signature guillotine in his final fight.
He tried.
He did
a few times, and I was sitting here, of course, in these wonderful soundproof studios, yelling at the TV because you were rooting for him because of it being his last fight. I was surprised they kept the fight going as long as they did. I thought he had a few chances there where they were going to call the fight. Were you shocked that this wasn't called? Obviously, you think with him, it's going to go to a decision most of the time anyway. Yeah. But were you shocked that they didn't call the fight later in the second round?
They could have. But
what about the last minute and a half of the first round?
First round, exactly.
Yeah, oh my God, yeah.
Absolutely.
Well, I think what ended up happening with Faber, as much as he talked about it not getting to him, that it was his hometown of Sacramento and it's his last fight. I think he came out with such an adrenaline rush that first round, the way it went, I think he blew half of what he had right then and there. And I think he kind of just laid back and just, Brad Pickett's, I'm not going to say he's a top shelf guy anymore, but he's still dangerous. And I don't think Urijah Faber wanted to go out there swinging for the fences with half a gas tank and get knocked out in his last fight. I think he threw everything he had in the first round, so spiked up on adrenaline like, a mini Hulk, and then just went, okay, all right, I got to slow it down a little bit because I'm going to get in trouble here. And he still beat him from pillar to post for the rest of the fight.
Yeah, he looked incredibly well for that his retirement fight. I don't think he let the emotions really get to him too much, especially after that first round. He played it smart and just picked him apart from the ground and from standing.
Yeah. And from a media perspective, watching the post fight press conferences and then especially like right in the octagon afterwards, it was interesting that he held his composure as well as he did, knowing that he's in his hometown. This is the last time he was going to fight in the octagon, and to know that he had so much support there, which I think the UFC was really smart in the way that they had this scheduled out to have him fight in Sacramento. But let's get back to what we were talking about last week, too, Ian, because we had a lot of people on Facebook taking shots at you. France, even your own cousin was on there taking shots. It was great. I was loving it all week, and they were taking shots at you, saying that there's no doubt you're an idiot and he should be in the Hall of Fame.
Well, Rich actually, I think, agreed with him.
Did he now? You're on our Facebook page right now, France. What do you got?
And then his twin brother, I know, called him an idiot and said,
Love it.
It depends on what you're going to look at. I mean, if you're going to look at this as the UFC Hall of Fame, the way the UFC has treated it, yeah, Urijah Faber is going to get in. If you look at it at the traditional sense of a Hall of Fame, it has to be a top shelf guy who really was the peak of the sport. Urijah Faber's just not there. Is he going to get in the UFC Hall of Fame? Yeah, he's going to get in the UFC Hall of Fame.
Wait, yes. What did you just say?
He's going to get in because the criteria are just, they're not realistic. They just put you in because they liked you.
All right, let me ask you this. Does Marvin Harrison deserve to go in the NFL Hall of Fame because he had Peyton Manning?
Well, that's entirely different, though. This is a single sport. It's one-on-one.
Okay. All right, well, he's still in the Hall of Fame now.
He's got the numbers, yeah.
Well, yeah, because he had a bunch of catches, but he was never known as the number one wide receiver in the NFL, was he?
Well, if you want to break this down, all right, look at the UFC Hall of Famers. You have guys that I think are deserving in there. You have guys like Randy Couture, who over the course of his career has been a top-flight guy fighting for belts and winning for the entirety of his career until the very end. He might never have been the single, no doubt, best guy in the sport, but he was always there, always competing, winning and losing belts.
Always a champion.
Then you have Ken Shamrock. Most of his career is a travesty. It's awful. But at a point in time, he was, for a couple of years, the guy. The only guy who sold and the only guy who dominated everyone. That's a Hall of Famer for me, too. If you can have long-term success at the highest of levels, or you can be that guy for 3 years, 2 years, that just runs the sport, that's a Hall of Famer. Urijah Faber can't lay claim to either one of those. He never had perennial top-shelf success, and he never was the best guy. He was never the best guy in his own weight class.
So does it come down to you that in order to get into the Hall of Fame, you have to have a belt at some point?
You don't necessarily have to have a belt, but you have to beat the best fighters. And we've gone over this before. Urijah Faber never beat the best guys. He beat the guys underneath him and lost to the best every single time. There's never a point where you can say he was number one in his own weight class. Not one point ever.
It's just interesting to see because especially all of the love he got that night. And for everyone who's not even a diehard fan like you two, and that I'm slowly becoming now doing this podcast every week, but he was a guy that drew people into the seats. He was a guy that really transformed and helped this sport grow.
Okay, but to that, I mean, the easiest correlation for me being a Yankee fan, I love Bernie Williams. I thought Bernie Williams was one of the perennial great players. Bernie Williams will more than likely not be a Hall of Famer. Yeah. Paul O'Neill, not a Hall of Famer.
Yeah, but Bernie Williams was a batting champion. He won a few World Series rings, so
he probably still won't make it. Jorge Posada, probably not going to make the Hall of Fame.
Yeah, Jorge was one of those where he was just in the right place at the right time. He was an awful catcher.
But there were years where he hit over 350.
Yeah, there was.
But is he going to be a Hall of Famer?
He was mainly hitting and not catching every day.
That guy won't be a Hall of Famer. Urijah Faber, he's a top-shelf guy. He was always great. He deserves all the recognition for that, but he will not be a Hall of Famer.
But they were never, all the names you just mentioned too, especially being, me and you being diehard Yankee fans like we are, they were never known as the best at their position, were they? Scott Brocious was never known as the best third baseman, nor Bernie Williams or Paul O'Neill as the best outfielder in baseball.
But Urijah Faber was never the best bantamweight or featherweight either.
But he was a top 3 or 4, right? No?
Sure, and lost to anybody in the top 5 every time he fought him.
But he was still there. So, listen, I love this conversation because it's definitely getting people involved, and I love hearing the stuff that we have on Facebook.
All I have to say is losses, Dominic Cruz, Frankie Edgar, Renan Barão, Jose Aldo. Wins? Well, nobody on that level unless you consider Bruce Leroy and Frankie Saenz being top shelf or Yuri Alcantara. It's not the same. Every time he fought a top shelf guy, he ended up on the wrong end of it. Every single time. Even going back to his WEC days, his biggest claim to fame is Jens Pulver or Dominic Cruz, 10 pounds too heavy at 22 years old. Jens Pulver. Jens Pulver was relevant in 2001.
France, what was your position on this? Because I know you were reading a lot of the stuff on Facebook as well. Are you still in, there's no doubt he's going to be a Hall of Famer? Or
for the UFC, yes.
Yeah, like I said.
It's a no doubt he's in the UFC
You had to know
Hall
that
of
was
Fame.
coming, Ian. You had to know it was.
So, I mean, and then you got Rich. Rich is saying he doesn't deserve to. I mean, he recognizes him as being a really good fighter, but doesn't believe he should be. And his twin brother has the opposite position and did call Ian an idiot.
Yes.
His brother Chris does think he deserves it. And so it's 50-50 on Facebook right now.
So now what we need is more people to jump on, especially in this episode, to let us know whether there's no doubt Urijah Faber will be, and then tell us why. If you think he's not, tell us why, because of all the stuff that Ian just laid out.
I will say, if he's going to go in, It should be for his accomplishments outside of the cage.
Would you deal with him? Yeah, would you deal with him for going in for like meritorious status, like for what he's done for the UFC, as opposed to just his record alone?
I wouldn't argue with him going in for being one of the most popular fighters in what back in the early 2000s was the hotbed of mixed martial arts, which was California. The West Coast was the spot where this sport stayed alive in its dark ages, where it was off TV, off pay-per-view, and couldn't live. California kept it running, and he was one of the biggest guys. So if he's going to go in, he should go in for that. But I don't want to hear anybody tell me he's top 5 all time, because he's just not.
I'm waiting for those on Facebook, Ian. I'm waiting for them because they're coming. I know they are. They're going to listen to this podcast and be like, I'm going to do my research and tell Ian there's no doubt he'll be a top 5er. But we'll see. Please let us know on Facebook. Tell us how we're doing. If there's anything that we're missing and you guys want to talk about, let us know. Guys, let's move on to some news we found out last week, which is interesting because it really hits a heavyweight that was well known for a long time and was a big fight that he's getting suspended for, and that was Brock Lesnar.
Yeah, Brock Lesnar.
That took a while for them to actually finally suspend him, though.
Well, he kept delaying it. Eventually, it's sealed. We'll never know what the results were, but they gave him 1 year. It's his first failure.
$250,000.
Yeah, $250K. Now, here's the kicker. This is what makes me sick. He gets fined $250,000. Okay, that's supposed to really hurt. The dude got a $2.5 million payday just to show up.
And who knows how much he made off of the pay-per-view.
Reportedly over $7 million. And he lost $250K. So add that into the fact that he got an exemption, and it does look very fishy. Add that into the fact that he tested positive 8 days before the fight, and nobody knew until the fight was over.
Very fishy.
It doesn't look good. Now, you should have expected this. I mean, come on. He's coming straight out of the WWE with 3 months' notice. You know those guys aren't tested the same way. You know those guys do whatever they have to do to stay healthy on that schedule because that's rough. And to look good.
Yeah,
the UFC's not about looking good.
No, of course not.
Look at Derek Lewis in Albany. All right, he's a big old chubby boy, and it doesn't matter. Look at Roy Nelson. That guy eats Burger King every freaking day, it looks like.
Well, look at Brock Lesnar's last opponent, Mark Hunt.
Yeah, Mark Hunt. I mean, he's built like a brick shithouse, but he's
like one
tiny little chubby guy.
Mm-hmm.
Now, I mean, Brock Lesnar, good riddance. I loved him. I didn't like his return. I wish I could just remember him dominating Frank Mir at UFC 100 and not have had to deal with this. We will never see him again in a cage again, I don't think. At least I hope we won't.
I hope we won't, but who knows?
Well, that was going to be my question to you guys. Would you be shocked? I mean, he's 39. So with this suspension, now he'd be past age 40, almost 41, to come back into the octagon. You really think there's no chance at all, even if there's a significant amount of money, if they bring back?
I'll leave it at this. If he's smart, he never touches the cage again. If the UFC doesn't want the bad press, he never touches the cage again. He will never compete on the top level for a title again. But we didn't think he was coming back at 205. If there's a spot where the UFC needs a payday and he's willing, guess what? We're going to see Brock Lesnar one more time.
Yep.
Yeah, I mean, it's either it's going to be a payday or something where him and Vince McMahon at WWE have a little spat, and then he's got somewhere else he needs to go. Because honestly, what else is he going to do? This is what he's been doing for the last 20 years of his life.
Yeah,
some sort of combat sport, or I know a lot of people on here might not consider WWE a combat sport, but acting rather. That's all he's been doing. Yeah, that's what he's been doing for 20 years. After wrestling in college, and then he moved on to WWE, and now this. So it's kind of all he knows.
Unfortunately, the guy is worth a lot of pay-per-view buys. So there's always the chance he comes back. Because you bring him back, you pay him $5 million, and he gets you 1 million pay-per-view buys at $60 each. I think it's worth it. Suddenly you just did 60 million just easy, and he took 5. Yeah, that's worth it. That's an even trade.
Mm-hmm.
It could happen. I don't know if it's going to happen. A lot of it's going to depend on what goes on with these MMA associations, but who knows?
It's definitely an interesting dynamic because there's no doubt that he was one of the biggest draws for years, and then something like this happens. And it's interesting because in sports like the NFL, if someone gets suspended 4 games, we really don't bat an eye. Okay, when is he coming back? Whatever. This one's just kind of like, I feel the same way. Like, okay, who cares? He's 39. He's not coming back anyway. Whatever. No one really cares.
Yeah, that's pretty much it. And what they took from him money-wise, it's a joke. And the worst part about that fine, what I hate the most, is the guy who gets the money goes to the Nevada State Athletic Commission. Mm-hmm. It doesn't go to the lab that tested him. It doesn't go to USADA. It doesn't go to the UFC. It doesn't go to his opponent. It just goes to the Nevada State Athletic Commission, which means the state of Nevada just made $250,000. And the guy who he beat up on and caused brain damage to, however insignificant it might have been, is just left hanging in the wind.
Yeah.
Like, oh, great. So he got fined, and where's my money?
Yeah, Mark Hunt thinks it wasn't harsh enough. He doesn't think that punishment was harsh enough.
Well, Mark Hunt's coming out saying, you owe me $1 million. Yeah. Somebody pay me $1 million. Like, dude, you got paid to fight. I get it. I get he doesn't like it. I think the fine money should go partially to him, but there's nothing you can do about it. You're not going to get $1 million. Stop.
Oh, man. It is the Fifth Round Podcast with your host, Ian Ford, Brian France. I'm the closer, Mariano. Now, guys, one of the stuff that we were talking about before we went on air was an interesting thought. While I was driving into work this past weekend, and on ESPN, we had one of the overnight podcasts running, and it was talking about UFC fighters cutting weight. And one of the big issues we've obviously been seeing is the new featherweight division that's going in for women at 145. So, interesting enough, Chris Cyborg was offered this position to fight for the title in January. She said no.
Yep.
She's offered again in February. She said no. I would like to fight in March. Now, I feel for her after listening to this because of how crazy that cutting weight is for your body in order to have these fights. Now, why couldn't Dana White just wait a month? What is your guy? I know you guys battled me beforehand. Come after me again, and if you guys have any position on Facebook, let me know, because this is an interesting dynamic. I think it's happening in the UFC.
You want to go first?
So, Ian, take shots, man. Go at it.
This comes down to money. So the UFC needs a fight for the January card in Anaheim. And they offer Holly Holm a fight against Cyborg. Holm says yes. Cyborg says no. It's not enough time. That's only 8 weeks' notice. I need more time to cut weight. So they come right back and offer the same fight in February, cancel the January card, and offer it in February in Brooklyn. Holm says no this time. They get Germaine Duran to me. She says yes. Cyborg says, well, no, that's still not enough time. I want it in March. She tried to muscle the UFC into her time schedule because that's where she wants it. She also tried to ask for it in Brazil, which wasn't going to happen. Now, the UFC turned around at that point and said, if you can't make weight in 3 months, no, you probably shouldn't even fight for this. And they went and got Holly Holm back, and now she's going to fight Germaine Duran to me for the title. This Cyborg saga has been going forever. It's annoying. They created this weight class for her. You agree with me, Brian?
Yeah, they absolutely did. I mean, all the media was complaining, oh, you need to make a weight class for 145, especially for Cyborg. You need to give her a spot. She was complaining there wasn't a spot for her. She can't cut to 140 anymore. So give me to 145. All this other crap. But then you don't go with... They are giving you the shot and you turn it down twice.
Yeah, she's begged for this forever.
I don't feel bad for her. I do not feel bad for Cyborg at all.
So let me just go off of some of the comments she made to UFC because of the issues with the last time she cut weight for her last fight.
She was on birth control because her nutritionist was an idiot.
Yep. So she says, in my last weight cut, I almost died. I was in the bathtub cutting weight. And now, explaining what cutting weight is to people, that these fighters sit in saunas. They use a bicycle with all these different clothes on to make sure that they cut water weight as much as possible.
It's not uncommon. Unfortunately, this all starts from boxing and wrestling.
Yeah, but there are fighters dying over this to make sure they make weight to fight for 15 minutes.
They've done what they can to curb it. It is not as bad as boxing and wrestling. Boxing used to be 15-round fights. Now it's 12 because of the weight cutting issue. They brought it back. And wrestling, the sport is built off of those. The framework for MMA, when it first got the unified rules, was from boxing. All the commissions are boxing commissions that have molded into being both. And the predominant great fighters of the early stages of MMA were all wrestlers. And wrestlers cut weight. Wrestlers cut weight in a far more dangerous fashion. Way more dangerous. You weigh in the morning of and you wrestle hours later, and you might lose 20 pounds and then have to try and put it back on in 3 hours. That's way more dangerous. But that's the cultures that built MMA. So they cut weight. The UFC has done everything they can. You weigh in at 9 a.m. on Friday, and you have a day and a half or more and won't fight until 10 p.m. on Saturday.
It didn't used to be like this.
No,
these are all things they've done.
It was 6 p.m. Usually at night the day before.
It's always been the day before.
But now they've bumped it up to the morning before, so you have a whole day instead of a half day, and to actually rehydrate and fill up and all that stuff.
They've done what they can. Now the smart fighters, the ones who aren't idiots, walk around. Say, who's a good example? Tim Kennedy. Tim Kennedy walks around at 215 and he fights at 185. But Tim Kennedy, nutritionally, weeks before the fight, changes his diet to a diet that he does not want for his lifestyle for forever, but that he can sustain for a few weeks, and cuts himself down by getting rid of fat, getting rid of water weight, down to like 195-ish. Weeks before the fight, he starts that. So by weight cut day, he's at 195. He needs to cut 10 pounds, puts on a sauna suit, sits in a sauna, rides a bike, takes a run, gets down to 186, weighs in, and then can put the water weight back on in a day and a half, and he walks into the cage closer to 200.
Yeah.
That's not that bad.
But isn't there more of an issue for women to have a cut weight than there is men? I mean, it's so much easier for us to go walk around and cut 5 pounds when we just go to the gym as opposed to a woman having to do this.
There absolutely is. The other issue is the more muscular you are, and Cyborg, say what you want, she's been caught with steroids in the past. As muscular as she is, it's harder for her. But that's why the weight classes are not as far apart. 155 to 170 to 185 to 205, that's 15 to 20 pounds. Women, it's 10 pounds. So 145, 135, 125, there are options. 145 is huge for a woman's weight class to begin with. That's big.
And she usually walks around at 170.
Yeah, and that's another issue we'll talk about later, 145 being as big as it is. But that's something where if she gets 12 weeks notice, if she can't nutritionally start to get down, that you shouldn't be fighting there. If 145 is terrible for you to make, then go up and wait.
Now, what she was saying is that when she found out about this weight class being open, she took a blood test that week, and they couldn't take blood out because of how thick her blood was from cutting weight previously. So now she gets 12 weeks notice, okay, and says, I can't fight anyone until March. I'm ready to fight anyone in March, but I can't do it before then because my health is not at its peak. I'm not ready to fight. I'm not going to go in there when I'm not physically ready to fight, which is exactly what you would want from your athletes, right? So now you're looking for the business side as opposed to the health side of your athletes.
But as me and Brian have talked about this before, I would have to see science as to how cutting weight thickens your blood. There are a lot of things that thicken your blood, and cutting weight is generally not one of them. If cutting weight will damage your kidney and your liver, generally your kidney. Daniel Cormier's had kidney failure before in the Olympics cutting weight for wrestling. It doesn't thicken your blood. Taking things like EPO and blood doping and things like that thicken your blood. Those are things that thicken your blood. Things like cheating, which she's been caught for before. So this is also, USADA has said they've started an investigation into her now because she kind of admitted, hey, I might have cheated. That's a problem. I don't think the weight cut had anything to do with it. I think she wanted a fight in a certain place against certain people, and she didn't want to fight certain people. If you look at her record, she has fought one fighter that I would even consider top shelf in her entire career, because 145, as I said, we'd get to it, is barren. There are not women that big. That weight class, are you kidding me? 125 is where all the killers are. Now, the UFC's strategically not made a 125-pound weight class. They have 115 and 135, so you can cut a little lower or you can go up a little higher, and it keeps two strong divisions as opposed to one, because if they brought in 125, a lot of people are leaving and going down or up to 125 from 115 and 135.
Yeah.
145 is so big, no one fights there. And you'll hear from fans, Ronda Rousey fought at 145. Yeah, when she was out of shape and just started MMA. She was chubby. She wasn't in shape. Not that she looked bad, but she wasn't physically at her prime as an athlete. When she got there, she was 135. 145 is so big, you will find no one to fight.
Now, once again, if you guys are listening, you have any issues with this, if you have anything to say, hit us up on Facebook, on Twitter at least. Let us know what you guys think about this, because I know weight cutting's been a serious issue in the UFC. Now, my question is going to come down to, if we leave this where it is, and now the question is, how often have we killed fighters for dropping fights because they didn't make weight? Now, where's the line? Where are we drawing the line now to where, okay, this fight's not going to happen? What if she said yes, and then she can't make it? Are you more ticked off at her now by saying, yes, I'll take this fight in January or February and can't make the weight, as opposed to saying, no, I can absolutely make it if it's in March, not in February?
What do you think, Brian? Which makes you angrier?
Because now you have the hype for 2.5 months that this fight's going to happen, and then 3 days beforehand you say, oh, no, I can't get to 145.
The situation is because it's her. Because she has not only complained and fought tooth and nail to get the 145 belt and a division all built around her, then you say you're not going to be able to make the weight that you want to fight at in 12 weeks. 12 weeks is more than enough time for any fighter to actually get that. And if you can't, you shouldn't be there. Go up 30 pounds, fight Gabby Garcia in a super fight.
Absolutely.
Stop complaining about 135 pounders not coming up to fight you at 145 pounds when there's a super massive monster in Gabby Garcia fighting overseas. Tell Dana White to assign her just the one super fight for you at 185 pounds, 200 pounds.
Yeah, absolutely. She wanted this weight class. She's campaigned. She's complained. This is all she's talked about. He makes it, and she makes excuses again. Listen, it's not a weight class. To me, honestly, this is a major mistake by the UFC. They're going to fail horribly with this. It's either going to be a barren weight class that nobody cares about, or they're going to scrap it. They've scrapped weight classes before. Mm-hmm. They went years, and people who have just started watching recently won't even believe this, but they went years without a lightweight belt. 155 was not even a weight class, and we're talking when it was building and becoming big. The Ultimate Fighter 1 came out. They didn't have a lightweight belt because there wasn't enough guys. Mm-hmm. Nobody wanted to see the guys they had, and they said, fine, we'll have a one-off fight here or there, but no belt. 145 for females is not going to last because there's no one there. You have top 10 ranked fighters with records like 7-6 and 3-0 because there's no one there. And as soon as they get good, like Rousey, they figure, oh, I'll be better if I lose all this chub, if I just drop 10 pounds and get in better shape. And suddenly they're 135 pounders. The only woman who's good at 145 is Cyborg, which is why she's destroyed people.
Yeah, and well, here's another question I want to get to you guys with this, and especially because you have a lot of people, like Ian, you're saying that this weight class will not happen. But what if I am someone, and we have all of these UFC fight nights every month. Then we have a UFC 207, 8, 9, all the way on up. There's always events that are happening all the time. Why can't you, as a business, say 145 could be great because we can push it in these UFC fight nights and we can get more people that'll be interested in it. And then what if you get 2 or 3 people, 2 or 3 women that say, yep, they go off 6, 7, 8-0. Now you can push them into the pay-per-views and say, okay, we can have a 145 belt.
Sure.
That's really pushed because we have all these events that are happening now.
I think you should be taking your time and not doing what they're doing. What they're doing right now is that title fight is 235 pounders who just aren't going to cut weight and fight at that weight class. And you're not going to keep that going. Why is 135 so great with Rousey? Because she had challenger after challenger after challenger that was legitimate. And you have still, right now, if you look at it, a chaos of who gets the next title shot. You've got Juliana Pena saying she's going to quit if she doesn't get a title shot if she wins. You've got this one over here saying, oh, I deserve it. Misha Tate just retired. Otherwise, she'd be in the mix still. I mean, you have so many great fighters at 145. I doubt anybody I walk up to on the street can name Chris Cyborg, let alone anyone else at 145. I'd be surprised if Brian France can name me more than 1 or 2 fighters at 145 that are females at 145.
But don't you think
they're not there?
But don't you think that's what they want, though? They want to build this up. It's still raw. You know what I mean?
For me, it's not because people don't want to be there. It's because the women aren't that big. You're talking about a woman who weighs 165, 70 pounds in shape, cutting weight to get to 145. Find me all the women you know that weigh 175 or 80 pounds when they're in shape. Otherwise, we're just going to be watching girls that should get in shape and fight at 135. I don't want to see, and this is just going to come off wrong,
but it's going to come off sexist.
But I don't want to see two chubby girls walking into the cage and gassing out in 3 minutes because they shouldn't be fighting there. The same way that I don't want to see Kelvin Gastelum fighting at 205 because he doesn't want to be in shape. I don't want to see fat guys walking in who didn't try. I want to see guys who are in shape at the best weight they can be at. And that's what you get with the men. Kelvin Gastelum can't make 170, so guess what? Well, go up to 185. They're going to force him. Well, if Cyborg can't make 145, then we don't have anything bigger. Get out.
Mm-hmm.
I love it, guys. I absolutely love it. Now, France, you had an interesting